Des, I have 23 emails time-stamped back to March 3rd. A BCC archive Gerald Fitch has never seen. And right now, Tiffany Marsh is standing in his office holding a $40,000 certificate with her name on it. So I'm going in. Desiree doesn't answer immediately. She's still on the line. And I can hear her breathing on the other end, which is how I know she understands exactly what this moment is. Then, do it, baby. Go do it. I'm standing outside the glass-walled office on the 14th floor of the Meridian Creative Group building. 9:47 in the morning. Thursday, May 15th. The sun is coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the north side in that thin, clinical way that makes everything look staged, which is what every promotion ceremony is. A stage. A moment designed to mean something official, even when what they're promoting is a theft. I have a manila envelope against my hip. I sealed it myself at 6:22 a.m. with my own hands, and the pages inside are still warm. 23 pages, printed at 6:14 a.m. on the second-floor copy room printer because the fourth-floor machine has been jammed for 16 days, and I came in 90 minutes before anyone else arrived at the office. Came in at 7 a.m., when the building was mostly dark, when the cleaning crew was finishing up, when I could feed those pages through the printer one at a time and make sure no one watched me do it. No witnesses, no questions, just me and the evidence. 23 emails. 23 timestamps going back to March 3rd. The day everything started. My name is Rochelle Dupree. I'm 38 years old. I have been employed at Meridian Creative Group for 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days, and I know that number down to the day because I've been counting. I started here as an account coordinator, making $39,000 a year, and I worked my way up to account manager. And the plan was always to make senior account manager, which comes with a title that means something and a bump to $67,500. The salary that would let me breathe for the first time in my adult life. That's what I'm still making now, while Tiffany Marsh is about to be promoted to $74,000 with a raise she's already calculated against whether she can refinance the second mortgage she took out 8 months ago. I can see them both through the glass. You get a lot of information through glass if you know what you're looking for. Tiffany Marsh is in a cream-colored dress. Something that reads expensive enough to signal. This is important. This is official, but not so expensive that it looks like borrowed confidence. Her hair is down. She's holding the certificate like it's fragile, and the matted frame is pale blue, the kind of blue that says achievement in corporate America, because corporate America looked up what colors mean and decided blue should mean that. Gerald Fitch is watching her face, but reading her pleasure, satisfied that he's performed the gesture correctly. He's 56, CEO, cufflinks. The kind of man who believes that the last person to put a piece of paper on his desk is the person who did the work, because that's how the world has always worked for men like him. He's reaching for the pen, probably a Mont Blanc, probably genuine because Meridian doesn't cheap out on ceremony. The thing about Gerald Fitch is that he's not a bad man. He's a convenient man, a man who walks into his office at 9 a.m. and reads what's been staged for him and makes decisions based on the order in which information arrives. He's never had to teach himself to look deeper. never had to develop the kind of attention that women develop early because no one ever required it of him. If Tiffany signs that certificate in the next 4 minutes, everything changes shape. The case is closed. Patricia Mena from Human Resources already closed it 11 days ago, May 3rd, around 1:17 in the afternoon, with an email that landed in my inbox while I was eating a turkey sandwich at my desk. I remember the exact time because I read it twice, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood something. The email said there was insufficient documentation of exclusive origination for me to claim the Hargrove account as mine. It said that collaborative account development is a common and accepted practice at Meridian, and that, in the spirit of promoting a collegial environment, we should all view this matter as resolved. All parties involved, as if there were multiple people with the same stake in this, as if what I built belonged to us both. I printed that email at 1:47 p.m. and I read it 3 times. The first time I was angry in that way that doesn't last. The second time, I thought about the BCC archive nobody at Meridian knew existed. The third time, I went home and started planning. That was 12 days ago. I'm wearing the same blazer I wore on March 3rd. Navy blue, single-breasted, cotton linen blend that holds a crease. I bought it at the Macy's in Perimeter Center on sale because I was going to call this one client, this one prospect, and I wanted to feel like I was dressing for the job I wanted, which was my own job as a person who could turn a cold call into a contract. It was a Wednesday when I made that call. I'd been reading the trade magazines that come through the office, the ones people leave on the break room table half-read, and I saw a profile of Marcus Hargrove, a regional director for a hospitality group. Nobody at Meridian had touched yet. 37 years in the business. 2 daughters, a quote about building relationships in an industry where everyone moves around. That's the kind of detail that tells you what someone values. I brought the blazer to the cleaners when the account started looking real, when Marcus started taking my calls, when I understood I was building something that mattered. I made the choice last night, standing in front of my closet at around 9 p.m., running my fingers across the hangers, to wear that same blazer today. Not because it makes me look professional. I already look professional. I've looked professional for 6 years at this company. I chose it because it's a private testimony, something between me and the version of myself who understood that March 3rd was going to matter. Claudette Reyes is 71 years old. She stepped into my life after my mother passed, and she has never stepped back out. She's the one who raised me through my teenage years, who taught me how to work, how to pay attention, how to make myself indispensable. She also taught me something that didn't make sense to me until I got older. And now it's the thing I understand most clearly. She said, "Baby, the thing about receipts is you don't need them until you do. And by then, it's too late to start collecting them." She was talking about her own story. 1998. A school board meeting in Louisiana where a man she worked with, a colleague she respected, someone she'd mentored a little, took a curriculum proposal she had written, spent weeks on it, researched it carefully, wrote it out in her own hand, and he presented it like he'd thought of it that morning, like it had arrived in his head fully formed, and she was sitting in a folding chair with no copy of her own work, no way to prove what her hands had made, and she watched him take the credit, and she never got it back, Never. 28 years ago, and she still carries it. That's why Claudette drilled something into me early. Every client email, every first contact, always a copy to myself, always a BCC line that goes to my personal Gmail account, where Meridian's IT department has no access, where nothing can be deleted or altered or filed away in a server that gets cleaned during a routine maintenance cycle that nobody asked for. Tiffany Marsh doesn't know about the trail. She came to my desk on March 28th. Tuesday, she asked to borrow my prospect folder. Said she wanted to add the Q1 media rate card to the file. Said it would just take a couple days. Said she'd have it back by Thursday end of business. I said yes. I always say yes. I've spent 6 years saying yes to requests at Meridian, and I've learned exactly what that costs. She brought the folder back on Thursday afternoon around 4 p.m, and when I opened it that evening, the air in my kitchen got very thin. The original intake sheet was missing, the page with my handwriting on it, the March 3rd date, the cold call notes that only I could have made, because I was the one who made them on my phone, in my car, in the parking lot of the Hargrove office building after I'd walked in cold and met with Marcus for 17 minutes and walked back out, knowing I'd be calling him again. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't understand what had happened. I understood completely, understood that Tiffany needed something, that the math had told her she needed it badly enough, and that she decided I was the person she was going to take it from. What I needed was time. I needed to think. I needed to be sure I understood the full shape of what was happening before I opened my mouth about it. That night, I took a picture of the gap in the folder. 7:51 p.m. My phone time-stamped it. I created a folder on my phone called Reference, and I filed the image there, and I didn't tell anyone. Not Desiree, not Claudette, not anyone at work. I carried that knowledge by myself for 3 weeks while Tiffany moved in closer to the account, while she volunteered to help with the client onboarding, while she started copying herself on emails and writing notes about joint development, while she started acting like the work I'd done for 14 weeks was something we'd built together. I watched it happen, and I waited. The thing about your own composure is that it costs something. Every moment I didn't say anything, every conversation I didn't have, every time I swallowed what I was feeling or sat still in a meeting while Tiffany talked about our account, all of that costs. It costs the chance to be believed when you finally speak. People see your patience and they call it acceptance. They see your precision and they call it obsession. They see you preparing and they call it desperation. I learned a long time ago that the only way to stop those conversations is evidence, not feelings, not what's right, evidence. And I have it. It's sitting in this envelope right now, sealed and warm, with my fingerprints on it and the timestamp on every page. There are 6 years of me in this envelope, 6 years of tenure, 6 years of showing up before my shift and staying after, of knowing the names of my clients' assistants and how they take their coffee, of building accounts the way Claudette taught me to build things. Carefully, with attention, with the expectation that my name would be on what I made. 6 years of pipeline instincts that Gerald Fitch mentioned by name during the March All Hands meeting, in front of the entire company. When he singled me out and said something about my new hospitality sector prospect. The only person who would have known those specifics, The only person who would have read my March prospecting memo closely enough to pull out that detail was someone who cared about what I was building. That was him. He saw my name and my work when it mattered. I'm standing at the door with my free hand on the handle. The glass is reflecting the hallway behind me, the elevator bank, the corner where the legal department is, the water cooler where people say things they shouldn't say and think no one is listening. My reflection in the glass is calm. My eyes are somewhere between resolution and the kind of quiet that doesn't need noise to be dangerous. The envelope is sealed. The pages are time-stamped. Every email header is readable. The file size is documented. The metadata is intact. Tiffany's hand is moving toward the pen. Gerald Fitch is still holding it, poised, waiting for her to take it. In the next 4 minutes, she becomes Senior Account Manager. In the next 4 minutes, the letter gets signed. In the next 4 minutes, this becomes the story of what Tiffany Marsh accomplished in her second year at Meridian Creative Group. And the Hargrove account, the $40,000 account that no one else wanted to touch when it came to me, becomes hers. Completely. Officially. With a frame and a raise and a signature in blue ink that makes it irreversible. Or I walk through this door and everything shifts. The handle is cold under my hand. I push it. When I started at Meridian Creative Group 6 years ago, I understood something about how this industry works. You're only as valuable as the client you brought in last quarter. You're only as safe as your pipeline. At Meridian, if you weren't actively generating revenue, you were actively invisible. The senior managers had their clients, the old money relationships, the accounts they'd inherited from predecessors or built years ago when the market was different. The rest of us were fighting for scraps of new business. And if you were smart, you fought quietly. You didn't tell people what you were working on until you had something signed. Loose lips in an office like that don't just cost you a promotion. They cost you the credit for your own work. I learned that lesson early. Very early. I was hungry enough to learn it without being told. 6 years of staying late. 6 years of reading everything that came through the break room. The trade magazines, the industry journals, the ones people left half open on the table because they'd skimmed the headline and moved on. That's where you find the people worth calling. That's where you find the account nobody else has noticed yet. That's where you find the space to make your own work, because nobody at Meridian was going to hand it to you. In early March, a Tuesday, I was eating lunch at my desk, a turkey sandwich from the deli downstairs and a bottle of water because I was trying to save money. And I picked up a trade magazine that had been sitting in the break room, the hospitality edition. I opened it while I was eating, and my attention snagged on a profile in the middle pages. Marcus Hargrove, Regional Director of a hospitality group that nobody at Meridian had touched yet. 37 years in the business. The article talked about his philosophy on client relationships, how he believed in working with companies that understood the long game, that invested in partnership instead of just transactions. There was a quote from him. Loyalty is rare in this industry because people don't understand that it's a two-way street. You have to invest in the relationship or it dies the first time someone offers a better margin. I read that twice. I folded the corner of the page and went back to my desk and sat there for maybe 5 minutes, thinking about what I was reading. This wasn't a man looking for the cheapest vendor. This was a man looking for someone who understood what he valued, someone willing to build something instead of just extracting profit. And the article said he was based in Atlanta. Atlanta! Not New York, not Los Angeles, not somewhere I'd need to travel to or coordinate with someone else on. Atlanta, Meridian's backyard. And as far as I could tell from looking at our client list later that afternoon, nobody at Meridian had even noticed him. That evening, I stayed late. The office was mostly empty by 6 p.m., just the cleaning crew and a couple of people who always worked past close. I sat at my desk with the magazine open in front of me, and I looked up Marcus Hargrove's company on LinkedIn, found his main number, wrote down a couple of notes about what I wanted to say, so I wouldn't ramble or sound unprepared. At 6:47 p.m., I called. His assistant answered on the second ring. Her name was Jennifer. She had that particular tone of someone who screens calls for important people, polite but efficient, the kind of person who gets paid to move you along without making you feel bad about being moved. I introduced myself. I said I was with Meridian Creative Group. I said I had been reading about Mr. Hargrove's approach to client partnerships, and I thought our company might be able to support what he was building. I didn't pitch him. I didn't launch into a sales presentation. I asked him a question instead. I asked what success looked like for him in the next 18 months. And could I send him some information about how other hospitality groups we'd worked with had managed that growth? Jennifer said she would pass the message along. She took my direct line. She didn't ask for my email address. She asked for my phone number, which meant she was actually going to do what she said she was going to do. I hung up and I sat at my desk for a moment with my hand still on the receiver. And I felt something shift. This was going to work. I didn't know how I knew it, but I knew it. The way he'd come through in that article, the way Jennifer had handled the call, the way my instinct had lined up with what the situation actually was. All of it felt aligned. I documented that call immediately, while the conversation was still in my head, exactly as it had happened. March 3rd, 6:47 p.m., called Marcus Hargrove's office, spoke with Jennifer, assistant, referenced article about Mr. Hargrove's partnership philosophy, asked about 18-month business objectives, left contact information, follow up in 1 week if no response. The memo was 1 page. I printed it and I filed it in a red folder I kept in my own desk drawer because no one at Meridian was tracking my pipeline yet. And I wasn't going to volunteer the information. Yet then I BCC'd the memo to my personal Gmail, where Meridian's IT department had no access. That habit was Claudette's invention. Claudette Reyes is 71 years old, and she is the reason I take receipts seriously. She came into my life after my mother passed away, and she raised me like she was responsible for my future, the way she would have been responsible for her own daughter. When I was in my 20s, still figuring out how to work, how to survive in an environment where other people were always circling for angles, Claudette called me one Sunday night. She said she wanted to tell me something she'd never told me before, something she should have told me earlier. She told me about a school board meeting in Louisiana in 1998. She was a school teacher then, and she had written a curriculum proposal for the elementary school where she worked. Spent weeks on it, researched it carefully, wrote it out in her own hand, every page, and a male colleague of hers, someone she'd respected, someone she'd actually helped along the way, took that proposal into a school board meeting and presented it like he had thought of it that morning, like it had arrived fully formed in his own head. Claudette was sitting in a folding chair at the back of that room, and she had no copy of her own work, no proof that her hands had made what he was claiming as his own. She just had to watch him take the credit, while she sat there with nothing but her word against his experience. "I didn't have proof," Claudette said to me over the phone that Sunday night. And by the time I understood, I needed it. It was too late to collect it. So this is what I'm telling you. Baby, the thing about receipts is you don't need them until you do. And by then, it's too late to start collecting them. I asked her if she got the credit back. She said no. She said it cost her too professionally. Yes. But also something else. The knowing that she had made something and someone had taken it and nobody would ever know the difference. She said she was telling me because she didn't want that to be my story. So I started collecting receipts. Every client email, every first contact, every prospecting call I documented. It went into my personal email, where Meridian's IT department had no access. It became part of how I worked. So automatic, I barely thought about it anymore. BCC Claudette into my inbox. Document the moment. Keep it where nobody could touch it. By late March, the Hargrove account was starting to look real. Marcus had called me back the next week, just like I'd hoped. He wanted to set up a meeting. I sent him a proposal. He asked questions. Good questions. The kind that meant he was actually reading what I sent and thinking about whether we could do the work. We scheduled a face-to-face meeting for early April. I brought the navy blazer to the dry cleaner. I printed out articles about his company. I prepared the way Claudette had taught me to prepare. Carefully, completely. Like the work mattered, because it did. I didn't know it yet, but I had 14 weeks of work ahead of me on this account. 14 weeks of late nights and early mornings and phone calls I documented, and emails I archived in multiple places. 14 weeks of building something real, something that would have my name on every page. The March All Hands meeting came in the middle of that first week of real work with Marcus. Gerald Fitch, the CEO, opened the meeting by talking about quarterly numbers. Standard corporate theatre. Then he got to the part about new business pipeline, and he started talking about the people who had brought in fresh prospects. Then he mentioned a couple of the senior managers and their long-standing clients, the relationships they'd been stewarding for years. And then he paused. He said my name. He said, "Rochelle Dupre has shown the kind of pipeline instincts we need at this company. She's identified a new hospitality sector prospect that could be significant for us this year." The whole room turned and looked at me. I was in the back corner, and suddenly everyone was looking at me like I'd announced something. I didn't stand up. I didn't perform gratitude or surprise. I just acknowledged the mention with a nod, gave a small smile, and looked around the room. I saw people nodding back. I saw people thinking, making mental notes about who had found the new business. And then I saw Tiffany Marsh. She was sitting maybe 15 feet away from me at a table with some of the other mid-level account managers. She was looking at me, and something crossed her face. A look I've replayed in my mind so many times since then that I could draw it. It was the look of someone doing math, someone calculating, someone looking at what I had and thinking about how to get it. It was so fast that if you hadn't been looking for it, you would have missed it. But I was looking. I saw the moment her face shifted, the moment she understood that I had something valuable, and her eyes went to me and they stayed there for just a breath too long. I didn't understand what I was seeing in that moment. I just logged it, I noticed, and then I moved on. But I felt it. I felt the weight of her attention landing on me. And I understood, in that small, quiet way you understand these things, that Tiffany Marsh had just registered something. She had looked at what I was building, and she had decided it was worth taking. After the all hands, I went back to my desk and I opened the red folder. It was exactly where I'd left it. Bottom drawer on the left, under some of my other account files. I pulled out the prospecting memo from March 3rd, and I held it for a moment, thinking about what had just happened. Gerald Fitch had announced to the entire company that I had found this prospect. He had used my name, and now Tiffany Marsh knew that this account existed and that it was mine. I put the memo back in the folder. I locked the drawer. Something I'd never done before. Something that was probably paranoid. But that was how fast the feeling moved through me. I needed to protect this. I needed to be careful. I needed to make sure that no matter what happened, the truth of what I had built was something I could prove. The Hargrove account was real. It was mine. And I was going to document every single moment of the 14 weeks it took to turn a cold call into a $40,000 contract. Because Claudette had taught me long ago that you don't get to decide what you deserve. You get to decide what you can prove. That was something I understood completely. The theft didn't announce itself. It moved the way good theft moves. So incrementally that each individual action looked like help. 3 days after the March all-hands meeting, Rochelle had a dental appointment. It was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, something she'd had on her calendar for 2 months. A root canal that had been coming, and she'd finally scheduled it because the tooth was past the point of pain management. She mentioned it to the team in the morning stand-up. Just mentioned it in passing. She'd be out from 2 to 4. Back by 5 if Dr. Patterson was on schedule. She had the Hargrove meeting prep done, the initial materials ready, everything set for when she got back. At 1:47 p.m., while Rochelle was in the dentist's chair with her mouth numb and her hands gripping the armrests, Tiffany Marsh sent an email to Marcus Hargrove with the subject line, Hargrove account, onboarding support. The email said that Rochelle had asked her to handle the initial client onboarding since Rochelle was unexpectedly called away for a personal matter. A lie so clean it could have been true, and that Tiffany would be coordinating the next steps. She said she'd be the main operational contact, but that Rochelle would be looped in for strategy decisions. She signed it professionally. She copied Rochelle in the CC line. Marcus had written back within an hour. He said fine, he'd work with Tiffany, but he wanted Rochelle looped in on everything moving forward. He had called Rochelle first, had decided to work with Meridian based on Rochelle's approach, and he wanted to make sure Rochelle stayed in the loop. His words were careful, but they were firm. When Rochelle came back to the office at 5:13 p.m. with her mouth still half numb, there were 6 new emails. Tiffany had copied her on the initial exchange with Marcus. She had also added herself to the standard onboarding email templates that usually came directly from Rochelle. She had sent an introductory email to Marcus explaining Meridian's process, signed her own name, CKC'd Rochelle in small letters at the bottom, and written something about collaborating with Rochelle on client strategy, a phrase that sounded like partnership until you understood what it meant. Partnership meant shared credit. Partnership meant the originator was no longer the sole owner of the relationship. Partnership meant that by the time the deal closed, it would be hard to say who had really done the work. Rochelle read them all at her desk, her tongue thick against the spot where the dentist had been working. She reread Tiffany's introduction email twice. The language was careful. It didn't claim credit. It suggested collaboration. It positioned Tiffany as the operational point person and Rochelle as the strategy voice, which sounded good in theory until you understood that operations were where the daily relationship happened, where the decisions got made, where you built trust, where the client started to think of you as their primary contact, where the credit started to belong. Rochelle didn't respond immediately. She didn't call Tiffany to the side and ask her what she was doing. She didn't send an email clarifying her own role or requesting that Marcus hear from her directly. She just observed. She copied the emails into a folder on her computer. She noted the timestamp on each one. She moved on. Over the next 3 weeks, Tiffany's presence on the Hargrove account deepened through a series of small moves that were each, individually, impossible to object to. She volunteered to coordinate the initial project kickoff because Rochelle was traveling to a conference that had been scheduled for months, a professional development thing that Tiffany would have known about from the department calendar. She added herself as a courtesy copy on the weekly progress emails with Marcus, then gradually moved herself from CC to the primary line where Rochelle had been. She joined the weekly check-in calls, offering to support the strategy discussion with operational details, which meant she was in every conversation, hearing every decision, able to comment on everything Rochelle said. The email shifted to, the subject lines changed, where Rochelle had been CC'd at the top. Tiffany moved to CC her at the bottom, where Rochelle had been the first name in a greeting. She became Rochelle and team, where Rochelle had been the person making recommendations. Tiffany started making them, with a line saying Rochelle concurs, language that made it sound like Rochelle was approving Tiffany's ideas instead of the other way around. Each time Tiffany moved closer to Marcus, she framed it as help. Each time, it looked reasonable. And Marcus, who had hired Meridian to work with Rochelle, found himself having more conversations with Tiffany than he was having with Rochelle. Not because Rochelle wasn't doing the work. Rochelle was still running the strategy, still architecting the entire approach, still staying late thinking through the problems that came up during calls she'd heard about secondhand, through emails that mentioned her in the CC line. But Tiffany was the one Marcus heard from most often. Tiffany was the one who sent the daily updates. Tiffany was the one who scheduled the calls. Tiffany was the one whose name appeared first when Marcus looked at the chain of email correspondence. It was a slow shift of gravity, and it was working. Around week 4, on a Monday morning around 9:30 a.m., Tiffany came to Rochelle's desk. She was holding the red folder, the one with all the Hargrove prospecting materials, the intake sheet with Rochelle's handwriting on it, the notes from the cold call on March 3rd, everything that documented the account's origin and proved who had found it. Rochelle was at her desk, checking emails, and Tiffany stood in front of her holding the folder like it was a casual thing. "Hey, do you mind if I borrow this for a couple days?" Tiffany said. "I want to add the Q1 media rate card to the file, make it more complete, get everything in one place for Marcus. It'll just be a couple days. I'll have it back by Wednesday, end of business." Rochelle looked at the folder. She looked at Tiffany. In that moment, she didn't know that she should be protective of that folder. She didn't know that she should ask why Tiffany needed to access the original intake sheet when all the other materials were in the shared drive. She didn't know that the original intake sheet, the page with Rochelle's handwriting and the March 3rd date, was the linchpin of everything. The one document that would be hardest to recreate if it disappeared. She was still thinking about Tiffany as a helpful colleague doing her job. She was still, at that moment, operating under the assumption that the world worked a certain way. She handed her the folder. "Sure. Thanks for handling that." Tiffany brought it back on Wednesday at 4:53 p.m. She set it on Rochelle's desk while Rochelle was on a call with Marcus. She said, "All set. Thanks for letting me borrow it." "Oh," and walked away before Rochelle could even look up. That evening, around 6 p.m., Rochelle opened the folder to file it back in her drawer. She was doing it quickly, just putting it away, and something caught her eye. Something was wrong. The folder felt lighter. The papers inside didn't feel right. She opened it fully and she went through every page, and she understood, with the kind of certainty that comes from paying attention, that the original intake sheet was missing. The page with her handwriting on it, the March 3rd date, the cold call notes, the one piece of paper in the entire world that proved she had made that call, had done the initial work, had identified the prospect before anyone else at Meridian even knew the account existed. It was gone. Rochelle sat at her desk with the folder open in front of her. The office was mostly empty. The cleaning crew would be coming in soon. She pulled out every paper in the folder. She checked both sides of every sheet. She counted the pages against the photocopy she'd made months ago and stored in her personal email. The habit Claudette had drilled into her. The photocopy showed 12 pages total. The folder now held 11. She photographed the gap in the folder. She used her phone camera and she took a picture of the open folder with the missing page's absence clearly visible in the sequence, with the other papers visible on either side of where it should have been. The timestamp on that photo said 7:51 p.m. She looked at that timestamp for a long moment, and she understood that what was happening was not a series of small helps. What was happening was not Tiffany overstepping or being too ambitious or not understanding boundaries. What was happening was deliberate. Someone had walked into her office, borrowed her folder, gone through it, removed the one page that would be hardest to replace, and brought it back, hoping Rochelle wouldn't notice. That night, Rochelle went home and she sat at her kitchen table for an hour with her laptop, doing the math on what she'd observed. She pulled up her email archives, all the BCC'd copies, all the documentation she'd been collecting. She created a spreadsheet. She listed every date, She traced how Tiffany had moved from offering to help with onboarding to primary contact to the person Marcus was asking questions to, over the course of exactly 21 days. She pulled up the Wednesday email where Tiffany had first written to Marcus. She looked at the timestamp, 1:47 p.m. during Rochelle's dental appointment, when Tiffany would have known Rochelle was unavailable. She calculated how many emails came from Tiffany now versus how many came from Rochelle. She counted. In the first week, Rochelle had sent 15 emails to Marcus. In the third week, Tiffany sent 12. By the fourth week, Tiffany was sending more emails than Rochelle. She understood that the stolen intake sheet wasn't a random thing. It was the piece that would make it hard for Rochelle to prove she'd originated the account in writing. It was the piece that would make the timeline murky. It was the piece that would make her story dependent on her own memory instead of documented fact. Without that sheet, it would be Rochelle's word against the reality that Tiffany had been the one managing the relationship, making the decisions, doing the visible work, being the person Marcus interacted with every single day. It would be Rochelle claiming she'd made the cold call, and Tiffany presenting a folder full of everything that had happened afterward, with her name on every page. She saved her analysis in a document on her personal computer. She photographed the gap in the folder one more time from a different angle. She saved that image too. She didn't show any of it to anyone. She didn't confront Tiffany. She didn't send an email to Gerald Fitch or Patricia Mena from HR. She didn't even tell Desiree Vargas yet. She just sat with what she knew. And she waited to see what came next. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, Rochelle was looking through the Q2 revenue report that had gone out to the leadership team. It was a standard document, a summary of all new business brought in during the quarter, broken down by employee with contract values listed. She was reviewing it casually, checking that her accounts were listed correctly, that the numbers matched what she'd submitted. And then she saw it. Under Tiffany Marsh's name, in the new business section, was the Hargrove account. $40,000. The contract value was there, in plain type, credited to Tiffany. Below it, in a small note in parentheses, it said, Joint development with Rochelle Dupree. Joint development. Rochelle read that phrase 3 times. The dental appointment had been April 1st. The stolen intake sheet had been gone by April 10th. The Q2 revenue report had gone out on April 19th, between the dental appointment and the Q2 report. Tiffany had managed to reposition herself as the account's equal partner, had stolen the documentation that proved otherwise, and had submitted official company paperwork claiming joint credit for $40,000 in new business. Rochelle printed the Q2 report. She printed it even though it made no sense to print it, even though she had it on her screen and in her email. She printed it, and she held the paper, and she looked at Tiffany's name next to the $40,000 figure. And she understood, in the kind of clarity that comes only when you've been paying attention all along, that this was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not something that could be resolved with a conversation or a clarification email. This was theft. It had been executed with precision, documented with care, and submitted to the company in official paperwork. This was someone taking what belonged to you and rewriting the story so completely that your own work became secondary to their claims. This was someone betting that you were patient enough, or tired enough, or uncertain enough to let it stand. And it had been done by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Someone who needed something badly enough to take it. Someone who had looked at what Rochelle had built and decided that half a credit was worth stealing the documentation to claim it. Someone who had walked into this office, borrowed a folder, and removed the one page that would make the whole story their story instead of Rochelle's. 3 days later, on April 22nd, Rochelle filed her complaint with HR. On April 22nd. I walked into Patricia Mena's office at 9:15 a.m. with a printed complaint and 4 pages of documentation. Patricia is the Director of Human Resources at Meridian, 44 years old. The kind of woman who looks competent in the way corporate competence looks. Which is to say, she dresses like authority and speaks like she's reading from a script that was written by someone else. She has a degree on the wall from a university I'd never heard of, and a photo on her desk of 2 teenagers in soccer uniforms. She was on the phone when I knocked, but she waved me in and finished her conversation while I stood in front of her desk, holding the file in my hands. When she hung up, I said, "I need to file a formal complaint about the Hargrove account." Patricia pulled out a form from her drawer like she'd been expecting this. She said she'd be happy to help. And what was the nature of the issue? I handed her the printed complaint. The summary was 4 pages, single-spaced, laying out the timeline from March 3rd when I made the cold call through April 19th, when the Q2 report came out with Tiffany's name listed as the primary contact. I explained how the account had been stolen piece by piece, action by action, and how I had documentation of every step. I said that a coworker had misrepresented my work and was claiming credit for an account I had originated and built over 14 weeks, and that the company was about to promote her and give her official credit for work that was not hers to claim. Patricia flipped through the pages. She didn't take notes. She didn't ask questions. She just read, turning each page slowly, her face revealing nothing. When she got to the end, she set the papers down on her desk, and she looked at me with a kind of practiced sympathy. The kind you learn in an HR training course about how to look when an employee brings you a problem you don't want to solve. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to open a formal investigation into this. I'll need you to provide all of your documentation, the emails, the prospecting memo, the materials you mention here. I'm going to conduct interviews with the relevant parties, and we'll review the facts objectively. This will take about 10 business days for me to complete the review. Can you provide me with everything by end of business today?" I said yes. I said I had already compiled everything. I said I would send it to her within the hour. "Perfect," Patricia said. She smiled in a way that was supposed to be reassuring. "I appreciate you bringing this to me through the proper channels. These situations can be tricky. Sometimes people interpret collaborative work differently. But we want to make sure everyone is treated fairly. We'll get to the bottom of this." I left her office and I went back to my desk, and I compiled the documentation into a single PDF. 23 emails from the BCC archive, printed in chronological order with every header intact, showing the date and time of each message. The prospecting memo from March 3rd at 6:47 p.m. The photograph of the gap in the folder. Time-stamped 7:51 p.m. on April 10th. The Q2 revenue report with the joint development notation beneath Tiffany's name. the email chain showing exactly how my role had shifted from primary contact to secondary voice over 21 days. I organised it all carefully with page numbers. And I included a cover letter that said, "Please find attached all documentation supporting my complaint, including time-stamped emails, prospecting materials, and photographic evidence of missing documentation." I sent it to Patricia Mena at 2:47 p.m. Then I went back to work. I had a call with Marcus Hargrove scheduled for 3 p.m. He wanted to discuss phase 2 of the project. I showed up to that call and I performed competence. I listened to what he was saying. I asked the right questions. I made notes. I acted like the outcome was already decided in my favor. Like this was just one more day in a series of normal days. I had a project update due at 4, and I finished it, and I sent it on time. I had a meeting about the Q3 pipeline at 5, and I sat in that meeting, and I listened to my colleagues talk about their prospects, and I contributed ideas, and I smiled at the right moments. Nobody knew that I was in the middle of a formal HR complaint. Nobody knew that everything I was saying, everything I was doing was performance, a careful construction of professional normalcy designed to hide the fact that everything had fractured. The waiting was the hardest part, not the waiting itself, but the knowing that while I waited for Patricia to investigate, Tiffany was still here, still sitting 30 feet away from me, still copying herself on emails that were supposed to come from me, still managing the Hargrove relationship like it was hers. I would hear her on calls with Marcus. I would see her name on emails. I would watch her move through the office like nothing had happened, like she hadn't stolen the intake sheet, like she hadn't systematically repositioned herself as the account's equal partner. Like she hadn't submitted official company paperwork claiming credit for work that was not hers. And I had to sit there and be professional about it. I had to acknowledge her in the hallway with a nod. I had to respond to her Slack messages with politeness. I had to attend meetings where we were both present and act like we were colleagues instead of adversaries. The performance was exhausting in a way that nothing else had been. It was one thing to discover the theft. It was another thing to know it had happened and have to pretend I didn't know while waiting for someone else to confirm what I already understood. On the 4th day of waiting, I called Desiree Vargas. We'd been friends since the 8th grade. 33 years of knowing each other, of understanding each other's families, of walking through life together. She was a senior paralegal at a law firm downtown, which meant she understood how institutions worked and what they were willing to do to protect themselves. I called her during my lunch break, and I sat in my car in the Meridian parking lot, and I told her everything. I told her about the dental appointment and the stolen intake sheet and the email repositioning and the Q2 report and Patricia Mena saying she would investigate within 10 business days. Desiree listened without interrupting. She asked a few questions about Tiffany's tenure at Meridian, about whether I had told anyone else, about whether Marcus Hargrove knew what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that changed everything. "Rochelle, they're not going to fix this for you. You're going to have to show them what fixing it costs." I didn't answer immediately. I sat there in my car, in the parking lot, with the phone pressed to my ear. And I understood what she was saying. She was saying that HR exists to protect the institution, not the employee. She was saying that Patricia Mena's job was not to deliver justice. It was to manage liability and keep the company out of lawsuits. She was saying that the system I'd trusted to work, the proper channels I'd been told to use, the process designed to handle exactly this kind of situation, would not work for me because it wasn't designed to work for people like me. "What do you mean?" I asked her. She said, "I mean, you need to think about what you want. Do you want the title back? Do you want the commission? Do you want to stay at that company after this is over? Because depending on what you want, you have different leverage, but you're not going to get anything by sitting still and hoping they'll do the right thing. They're not going to do the right thing. The only person who's going to do the right thing is you." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes with the sun coming through the windshield. And then I went back inside and I kept working. The days passed. April 23rd, 24th, 25th. Friday came and went. The weekend I spent at home, not thinking about work, or trying not to think about work, which meant I thought about it constantly. Monday. April 28th. 4 business days had passed. Tuesday, 29th. 5. Wednesday, 30th. 6. And Thursday, May 1st. 7. Friday, May 2nd. 8. I counted. I knew exactly how many business days had elapsed. I knew exactly how many were left. Patricia had said 10 business days. By May 2nd, the threshold had passed. I thought maybe she would email me with a decision on Friday afternoon. She didn't. By May 3rd, I was expecting it. I came to the office early. I had my computer open and positioned so I could see when new emails arrived. I was ready to read whatever she had decided. The email came at 1:17 p.m. The subject line said, RRE, Hargrove account complaint? Determination. I opened it. Patricia had written 2 paragraphs. The entire resolution of my complaint fit into 2 paragraphs. The first said, after reviewing all materials provided in conducting interviews with relevant parties, I have determined that there is insufficient documentation of exclusive origination of the Hargrove account. While you did make the initial cold call, the account was developed through collaborative effort, and your role in that development cannot be isolated as uniquely yours. The second said, collaborative account development is a common and accepted practice at Meridian Creative Group. Multiple people often contribute to the success of an account, and credit should reflect that reality. In light of this determination, I am closing this matter and consider the complaint resolved. I read those paragraphs 3 times. I read them slowly, word by word, trying to find something in them I had missed. And the moment I saw the phrase, insufficient documentation, something shifted inside me. It was a small shift, quiet, but it changed everything. Insufficient documentation. That was what Patricia was saying. She had reviewed my emails, my prospecting memo, my folder photograph, and it was not enough. It was not proof. It was not documentation that could not be disputed or reframed or explained away as collaborative development. But I had something else. I had 23 emails in my personal Gmail account, untouched by Meridian's IT department, time-stamped and dated, showing the entire progression of the Hargrove account from the moment I made the cold call to the moment Tiffany claimed it. I had the folder photograph with the timestamp 7:51 p.m. showing the gap where the missing page should have been. I had Claudette's lesson about receipts collected through a habit so ingrained I'd stopped thinking about it. I had preparation. Patricia was telling me that her review had found the documentation I'd provided to HR insufficient. What she didn't know was that I had more. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I first understood what Tiffany was doing. What she didn't know was that the system she represented, the proper channels, the official investigation, the 10-day review, was not the only tool I had. I printed the email. I looked at the date and time in the header. May 3rd, 1:17 p.m. I filed it in a folder on my computer labelled Reference. Then I picked up my phone and I called Desiree. "They dismissed it," I said. "Patricia determined there's insufficient documentation." Desiree didn't ask for details. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to show them what documentation actually looks like." That evening, I went home. I didn't cry. I made a list. I pulled out the photographs I'd taken. I looked at the email timestamps in the BCC archive. I read through the documentation I had been collecting all along, the prospecting memo from March 3rd, the email chain showing my account evolution, the Q2 report with Tiffany's name, the folder gap, and I understood, in the way Claudette had taught me to understand, that the system was not designed to protect me. It was designed to protect itself. The only person who was going to fix this was me. The first weekend after I received Patricia Mena's dismissal, I sat at my kitchen table with Desiree Vargas, and we started building the case that would actually matter. My kitchen is small. It's where I eat breakfast alone most mornings, where I pay bills, where I make my coffee the way Claudette taught me to make it. It's not a place designed for planning what comes next. But that's where we worked anyway. Desiree brought a laptop. She brought a notebook. She brought a box of sweet potato pound cake she'd made the night before. The real deal, made with the good yams from the farmer's market, not the canned substitute. And she set it on the table between us like we were settling in for something that would take time and require sustenance. "Okay," she said, pulling up a blank document on her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Walk me through this again. But this time, I'll want every single email, every date, every timestamp, every moment when the language changed. We're going to reconstruct the entire chain from start to finish." I pulled out the BCC archive. 23 emails. Printed in order. Each one a piece of the story that nobody at Meridian knew I had saved. I had collected these obsessively without thinking about the collecting. The habit Claudette had drilled into me so thoroughly it had become invisible. So automatic that I didn't even register I was doing it anymore. I arranged them in chronological order across my kitchen table. The first one was dated March 3rd at 6:47 p.m., the cold call to Marcus Hargrove's office. The last one was May 2nd at 4:33 p.m., 2 days before my complaint was dismissed. 2 days before Patricia Mena sent me the email saying insufficient documentation. 2 days before I understood that the only person who would help me was me. Desiree ate pound cake, and she read through every email methodically. She typed notes in her document. She asked specific questions. When exactly did Tiffany insert herself on the email chain? What date did you first see her name as the primary contact instead of secondary? When did the language shift from her being supportive to her being collaborative? How many emails came from you versus how many came from her in the final week? I answered every question. I knew these dates the way you know the details of your own betrayal, with the kind of precision that comes from having reviewed them so many times that the numbers are written into your memory, like a phone number you've dialed 1,000 times. Over the course of that first weekend, we built a timeline in Desiree's document. We documented how Tiffany had moved from helpful colleague to account owner in exactly 21 days. We listed every email where her role had shifted, the moment she went from being CC'd to being on the primary line. The moment her name started appearing before mine in greeting. The moment she began signing emails as if the account's success was her responsibility. We noted the exact timestamp when Marcus Hargrove's language had changed from addressing Rochelle at Meridian as the primary contact to addressing Rochelle and Tiffany, with Tiffany's name first. We had dates. We had times. We had proof written in Tiffany's own words, forwarded to herself on my BCC line, where she couldn't possibly have known I was watching. By Sunday evening, Desiree leaned back in her chair, and she said something that changed the direction of everything. "Emails can be forwarded," she said, her voice even, her paralegal brain thinking 3 steps ahead. "People can claim they were altered, or taken out of context, or that they remember things differently. We need something else. We need something independent. We need something that Tiffany can't explain away or reframe as collaborative development." I understood what she was saying. Emails were good. Emails proved intent. But emails could be contested. An attorney could argue collaborative account development. An HR department could say both people contributed. What we needed was something external. Something from a source that had no stake in protecting Tiffany Marsh. Something that would stand up to questioning. On the second weekend, Desiree brought something different. She brought the knowledge that I, as an employee of Meridian Creative Group, had the right to request my own personnel file under my employment rights. She brought the understanding that my personnel file would include a comprehensive log of every time any document related to me or stored under my name had been accessed by anyone in the company. She brought the idea that maybe, just maybe, Tiffany's access to the original intake sheet had left a record, a digital footprint that the company itself had created, that the company itself maintained, that Tiffany could not have known would betray her. We sat at my kitchen table again. The second weekend, Desiree pulled up the personnel file request form on her laptop. "You fill this out," she said, her voice steady, her whole demeanor shifting into lawyer mode. "Request your full personnel file. Specifically, ask for the document access log for all Hargrove account materials. They're required by law to provide it within a certain time frame. 7 to 10 business days, depending on the company's policy. Meridian probably says 10. I filled out the form. I printed it on my home printer. I drove to Meridian the next Monday morning, and I walked into Patricia Mena's office, the same office where I'd filed my complaint, the same office where she'd assured me everything would be reviewed carefully and fairly within 10 business days. I said, "I'd like to request my complete personnel file. I'm requesting it in writing under my employment rights." Patricia took the form. She read it. She said, "This will take about 7 to 10 business days to process." 7 to 10 business days. I nodded. I said thank you. I walked out, and I went back to work, back to my desk, back to the performance of normalcy while I waited for the paper trail to confirm what I already knew. The access log arrived on May 10th. It came in an envelope from HR, sealed, addressed to me. I opened it at my desk with my heart in my throat, and I found a single page printed out, a log of every time any document in my personnel file had been scanned, opened, or accessed by anyone in the company. There were the usual entries: my hiring paperwork, my offer letter, my performance reviews, the training certificates I'd completed over 6 years. And then, in the middle of the list, was the entry that changed everything. April 4th, 2:47 p.m. Document: Hargrove account, prospect intake sheet. Accessed by Tiffany Marsh. Employee ID 24891. Action scanned. 4 days. Tiffany had returned the folder to me on Wednesday. April 10th at 4:53 p.m. I remembered the exact time because I'd noted it when I realized the page was missing. But the intake sheet had been scanned into the Meridian document management system on April 4th at 2:47 p.m. 4 days before she returned the folder, while she still had it, under her own employee ID. Which meant this wasn't just borrowing. This wasn't just looking at something. Tiffany had intentionally opened the folder, had intentionally located the intake sheet with my handwriting and the March 3rd date, and had intentionally fed it into the company scanner, presumably to create her own copy, presumably to have documented access to the account's origin point. What Tiffany didn't understand was that her attempt to create her own record of access had instead created proof of theft. I called Desiree immediately. I said the intake sheet was scanned under her employee ID on April 4th, 4 days after she borrowed the folder, before she returned it. Desiree said, "Print that page. Save it. Keep it somewhere safe. So don't tell anyone. Not yet." The second pivot came a few days later, when Desiree showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening with her laptop and a focused expression. She said, "I need to tell you something about Tiffany Marsh, and I need to know if I'm overstepping, but I pulled some public records, and I think you should know what they say." She opened her laptop and she pulled up a property records database. She said, "You told me Tiffany's been at Meridian for 2 years. She's 31. She's married. She's been in Atlanta for..." She paused, scrolling. "About 2 years. Let me check the property records for her address." Desiree found Tiffany's address in the public record system. She found her name on a property deed, and she found the mortgage information tied to that property. 2 mortgages. The first was the original mortgage on the house, dated 7 years earlier, which meant someone else had owned that house before, or Tiffany had bought it with a different name, or there was some other explanation. The second mortgage was the one that mattered. It was dated 8 months ago, a home equity line of credit. A second mortgage taken out on the property to access cash, to solve a problem, to meet an obligation that a single income couldn't cover. Desiree looked at me across my kitchen table. Her eyes were steady. She said, 8 months ago. That's roughly when Tiffany would have known she needed money badly. That's roughly when she would have understood that she was going to have to do something about the debt. That's roughly when she would have started looking at your account and thinking about what it was worth. I sat with that knowledge for a moment. I understood what Desiree was saying without her having to spell it out. Tiffany had taken out a second mortgage 8 months ago, which meant she'd been carrying debt, carrying need, carrying the weight of a financial obligation that was eating her alive. A second mortgage means your first mortgage isn't enough. A second mortgage means you're desperate. And then Tiffany had looked at what I'd built. The $40,000 Hargrove account. The client relationship that was only possible because I'd made that cold call on March 3rd. And she'd made a calculation. She'd decided that the account and the promotion it would bring and the salary increase that came with it were worth the risk of stealing. I said to Desiree quietly, I understand why she needed it. I just needed it first. Desiree didn't say anything else. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. And then she let go. We both understood that understanding Tiffany's motivation didn't change what she'd done. It just meant that when the reckoning came, we would know that it wasn't malice. It was desperation, which somehow made it worse. A few days later, I got a forwarded email from a colleague at Meridian who thought I should know what was coming. The email had been sent out to the entire department. The promotion ceremony for Tiffany Marsh was scheduled for Thursday. May 15th at 9 a.m. in the executive conference room. Gerald Fitch, the CEO himself, would be presenting the certificate personally. There would be cake in the break room afterward. There would be an announcement company-wide. There would be a framed certificate with the Hargrove account number printed on it. $40,000. There would be a moment when Tiffany would stand in front of the entire company and accept credit for work that was not hers to claim. I printed that email too. I looked at the date, May 15th, a Thursday. 12 days away from the day I received the notice. I went to my refrigerator where I kept a paper calendar, the kind you write on, not the kind you look at on your phone. And I found May 15th. I took a red pen and I drew a circle around the date. A dark circle, clear and deliberate. I left it there. I looked at it every morning when I came into my kitchen to make my coffee, the way Claudette taught me. I looked at it every evening when I came home from work and set my things down. I looked at that red circle and I understood, with the kind of clarity that comes only when you have done the work and collected the evidence and understood what you're going to do next. That this was going to be the moment. I had 23 emails, time-stamped and unalterable, showing the exact progression of how the account had been stolen. I had a document access log from Meridian's own system showing that Tiffany had scanned the intake sheet under her own employee ID on April 4th. 4 days after borrowing the folder. 4 days before returning it. I had the photograph of the gap in the folder, taken at 7:51 p.m. on April 10th, showing the empty space where the original intake sheet should have been. I had a paper trail showing that a woman with a second mortgage, a woman carrying debt, a woman in financial need, had stolen an account from a woman who had built it from nothing. And I had 12 days until the promotion ceremony, when Tiffany would stand in front of the entire company and the CEO would hand her a certificate bearing the $40,000 account number, bearing credit for work that was mine, bearing a promotion that belonged to me. 12 days to decide exactly what I would do with the truth I had reconstructed. 12 days to plan. 12 days to prepare. 12 days to turn what I knew into something that couldn't be dismissed as insufficient documentation. Something that couldn't be reframed as collaborative development. Something that couldn't be explained away by anyone. Not Patricia Mena. Not Gerald Fitch. Not Tiffany Marsh herself. I looked at that red circle on my refrigerator every single day. The 72 hours before May 15th were not frantic. They were the opposite of frantic. They were careful. They were precise. They were the kind of preparation that leaves nothing to chance. Nothing to hope. Nothing to the possibility that someone else might take your case seriously if you just ask politely enough. On Sunday evening, May 12th, I sat at my kitchen table and I assembled the envelope. Not rushed, not panicked, just methodical. A manila envelope, the kind you can get at any office supply store for 39 cents. Standard weight, sealed with my own hands at the flap. Inside it, I placed the materials in a specific order. The order that would tell the story most clearly. The order that would make it hardest to dispute or reframe or explain away. First, the 23 emails from the BCC archive. I had printed them in chronological order, starting with the March 3rd cold call at 6:47 p.m. and ending with the May 2nd email at 4:33 p.m. 2 days before my complaint was dismissed. 2 days before Patricia Mena had told me that my documentation was insufficient. Every email header intact. Every timestamp visible. Every piece of evidence that I had initiated the account. Had nurtured it. Had managed it. And had watched it be stolen piece by piece over 21 days. 23 pages of documentation. All of it archived in my personal Gmail account where Meridian's IT department had no access. Where it could not be altered or deleted or explained away as collaborative development. Second, the document access log. The single page from Meridian's own system, their own records, showing that the intake sheet had been scanned under Tiffany Marsh's employee ID number on April 4th at 2:47 p.m. The evidence that she had deliberately opened the folder I'd lent her, had deliberately located the original intake sheet with my handwriting and the March 3rd date, and had deliberately fed it into the company scanner. The proof that she understood what she was doing. The proof that this was not a mistake or a misunderstanding or a grey area. This was deliberate action taken with purpose. Third, the photograph. The gap in the red folder. The missing page. The visual representation of the theft. Time-stamped 7:51 p.m. on April 10th. The moment I'd understood that something was wrong, I placed each set of documents in order and I sealed the envelope carefully. I didn't write anything on it. I didn't label it or mark it or explain it. The documents would speak for themselves. I just held the envelope in my hands for a moment, and I felt the weight of it. Not physically heavy, just the weight of everything it contained. The weight of 2 months of investigation, of kitchen tables and sweet potato pound cake, of document access logs and public property records. The weight of Desiree's paralegal knowledge and Claudette's lessons about receipts. The weight of my own choices, my own decisions, my own refusal to accept that the system would take care of me. Monday evening, May 13th, I called Desiree. I had already decided what I was going to do, but I needed to talk through one decision. I said, "I'm going in tomorrow morning. I need to know if I should tell Patricia Mena first, or go straight to Gerald Fitch. There was a pause on the line. Desiree worked in law. She understood institutions. She understood how people protect themselves. Then she said, "Go to Gerald Fitch. Don't tell Patricia." I asked why. She said, "Patricia already said no once. You give her the chance to say no again, and she will. She's already made her decision. She's already written the dismissal letter. If you go to her and say you were wrong, she has to either admit she was wrong and reverse her own decision, which exposes her to liability, or she has to find a way to make your evidence fit into the story she's already told. She will choose the second one every time." "But Fitch doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. Give him the information first. Let him see it before Patricia has a chance to interpret it for him. Before she has a chance to protect herself by protecting Tiffany." I understood immediately that she was right. Patricia had already made her determination. Patricia had already ruled. Patricia had already closed the case. She had published her decision to the company. If I went to Patricia first, she would have to reverse course, admit error, open herself up to questions about her judgment and her process. She wouldn't do that. She would rationalize. She would explain. She would find a way to make this go away again. But Gerald Fitch was the CIO. He was the person who signed off on promotions and salary increases. He was the person who would be handing Tiffany the framed certificate that morning, the certificate that bore the $40,000 account number. And he didn't yet know that the account in question was not Tiffany's to claim. "You're right," I said to Desiree. "I'm going to go to Fitch. I'm going to walk into his office before the ceremony, and I'm going to hand him the envelope." "Good," she said. "That's the right call." That night, Monday night, May 13th, I called Claudette, not to ask for permission, not to get her blessing or her approval, just to say out loud what I was going to do, so it would become real, so it would stop being something I was thinking about in my head and start being something I was actually doing, something that was already in motion. Claudette answered on the second ring. She knew immediately that something was different about my voice. She said, "Baby, what is it? What's happened?" I told her everything. I told her about the stolen account and the document access log and the BCC archive. I told her about the 2 months of investigation and the sweet potato pound cake and Desiree pulling public property records. I told her about May 15th and the promotion ceremony that was scheduled for 9 a.m. I told her about the envelope I'd assembled with all the evidence inside it. I told her that I was going to walk into Gerald Fitch's office at 9:30 in the morning, right as the ceremony was starting. And I was going to hand him the envelope, and I was going to tell him the truth about what had happened. Claudette didn't interrupt. She didn't give me advice or try to talk me out of it or warn me about the consequences. She just listened. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the phone. When I finished, when I'd told her everything, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're a child of God, and don't nobody get to tell you different. You go in there with your evidence, and you stand still. Let the truth do the moving." I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I just held the phone, and I listened to her breathing on the other end, and I understood what she was doing. She wasn't giving me permission. I was already a 38-year-old woman who didn't need permission. She was bearing witness. She was telling me that what I was about to do was right. She was telling me to trust myself, the way she had trusted herself all those years ago when she'd learned that lesson about receipts, about documentation, about not letting other people write the story of your own work. I love you, I said. I love you too, she said. Now go get your rest. You're going to need it tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I went to my bedroom. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. I laid the navy blazer across my chair, the one I'd worn on March 3rd when I made the cold call to Marcus Hargrove's office, the one I'd brought to the dry cleaner, the one I'd chosen deliberately to wear into this room. And I looked at it for a moment in the darkness. I was going to wear it again tomorrow. I was going to wear it when I walked into Gerald Fitch's office. I was going to wear it like I was dressing for the job that was supposed to be mine. I got into bed. I didn't sleep immediately. I lay there in the darkness, and I thought about everything. I thought about the red folder and the missing page. I thought about the email chain and how Tiffany had moved closer and closer to the account, one action at a time, until she'd positioned herself as the primary contact. I thought about Patricia Mena's dismissal email with the phrase insufficient documentation. Words that had felt like defeat until Desiree had asked me, "What else do you have?" I thought about the document access log and the date April 4th and the precise time 2:47 p.m., the moment Tiffany had scanned the intake sheet under her own employee ID. I thought about Desiree sitting at my kitchen table, eating sweet potato pound cake, her laptop open, pulling legal precedent and public records and information that proved what I already knew. I thought about Claudette, 71 years old, in Louisiana, telling me that I was a child of God and that nobody got to tell me different. I thought about her 1998 school board meeting and the curriculum proposal she'd written with her own hands. I thought about her teaching me, all these years later, that you have to collect receipts before you need them. And then I fell asleep. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. on May 15th. I was already awake. I hadn't slept deeply. But I had slept. My body was ready. My mind was ready. I got out of bed. I showered. I dressed carefully, deliberately. I put on the navy blazer, the one from March 3rd, and I looked at myself in the mirror. I was composed. I was ready. My face was calm. My hands were steady. I picked up the manila envelope from where I'd left it on my kitchen table, still sealed, still containing everything. The weight of it was still real. I held it as I drove to the Meridian building. I held it as I parked in my usual spot. I held it as I walked through the glass doors. The office was quiet at 9:15 a.m. Some people were already at their desks with their coffee, settling in for the day. Most wouldn't arrive until 9:30 or 10. The hallways had that early morning emptiness, that sense of waiting. I could feel it in the air. Not tension, just the sense that this day was going to be different from all the other days. I walked to the 14th floor. I stepped out of the elevator. I walked toward Gerald Fitch's office with the envelope in my hand. His assistant was at her desk. She looked up and said, "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" I said, "No, but I need to speak with Mr. Fitch. It's urgent. Tell him it's about the Hargrove account. Tell him I have documentation he needs to see before the promotion ceremony." She picked up the phone. She said something I couldn't quite hear. Then she put the phone down and she said, "He can see you. Go ahead in." I walked toward his office door. My hand was on the handle. I could hear voices coming from inside. Gerald Fitch and someone else, Tiffany. She was in his office already, showing him something, probably the framed certificate, probably standing there accepting congratulations before the official moment. I pushed open the door at 9:47 a.m. The office was exactly as I'd imagined it. Glass walls on 3 sides. A view of downtown Atlanta spreading out beneath the 14th floor. Gerald Fitch's mahogany desk positioned so that the person sitting at it could see the city like it was something they owned. And standing in front of that desk, both hands on a framed certificate like she was cradling something precious, was Tiffany Marsh. Gerald Fitch was just handing it to her. He had it extended toward her. A pale blue mat, her name embossed in silver lettering. The Hargrove account number printed in the lower right corner. $40,000. The moment was suspended, frozen between the gesture of giving and the moment it would become official, before the certificate would hang on her office wall, before the company would confirm in framed form what the Q2 report had already claimed. Gerald looked up. For a half second, his attention was still on Tiffany, on the ceremony, on the routine gesture of handing out a promotion to a deserving employee. Then his eyes moved to me, and recognition crossed his face. I saw it happen. The moment where he placed me. I was the woman from the March All Hands meeting, the one he'd singled out by name in front of the entire company, the one he'd mentioned specifically when he talked about the people who had brought in fresh business. He'd said something about pipeline instincts. He'd mentioned a new hospitality sector prospect. He'd been paying attention that day, even if he hadn't understood what he was seeing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a dramatic entrance or slow-motion walk across the room, or any of the things that people do when they want their moment to feel significant. I simply walked across the carpet to the desk, and I set the manila envelope down in front of Gerald Fitch, right beside the keyboard on his desk, where it would be impossible for him not to see it. Then I opened it. My hands were steady. I slid out the 23 pages. The email chain from March 3rd at 6:47 p.m. through May 2nd at 4:33 p.m. And I spread them across his desk so he could see the headers, the dates, the timestamps, the progression of every message in chronological order. Then I spoke. Calmly. Specifically, with the same deliberate tone I had used on March 3rd, when I made the cold call to Marcus Hargrove's office, when I'd introduced myself to his assistant and asked a question instead of launching into a sales pitch. "Mr. Fitch, I originated the Hargrove account on March 3rd. Everything that follows is documented." That was all I said. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse Tiffany by name or lay out her actions in detail, or describe how she'd borrowed the folder and returned it missing the original intake sheet, or explain the document access log entry from April 4th. I didn't need to. The evidence would tell the story. The work would do the moving, the way Claudette had told me it would. There was a silence. It wasn't the kind of theatrical silence where you can hear a pin drop. That's something people say in stories, But real silence is different. Real silence is the absence of all the things you expect to hear. It's the absence of Gerald saying, "Congratulations, Tiffany," or Tiffany saying, "Thank you." It's the space where those words should have been, but weren't. It's the moment when everyone in the room understands that something fundamental has shifted and nobody quite knows how to respond to it yet. Gerald Fitch was looking at the pages. His eyes were moving across the email headers, reading dates, registering the timeline. Tiffany was still holding the certificate, but her grip had changed. She wasn't holding it out in front of her anymore, the way you hold something proudly. She was holding it closer to her body, like she was trying to protect it or reclaim it or simply understand what was happening. Tiffany said, "Rochelle, we developed this account together. It's collaborative. That's what..." She stopped. She understood that whatever explanation she was about to give had already been rendered false by the simple fact of those 23 pages fanned across Gerald's desk. The emails showed the timeline. The very first one showed my cold call on March 3rd at 6:47 p.m. The second showed my follow-up message. The 3rd through 7th showed my ongoing communications with Marcus Hargrove. Building the relationship, establishing the terms, moving the account from prospect to real possibility, and only then, starting on the 8th email, did Tiffany's name appear. First as a seat, then gradually as someone being looped in, then eventually as someone initiating communications, repositioning herself as the account's primary contact. The emails told the story better than I could have told it myself. Gerald picked up the first email. He read the timestamp. March 3rd, 6:47 p.m. My cold call to Marcus Hargrove's assistant. He read the subject line, Hargrove account, initial inquiry. He set that page down and picked up the next one. March 5th, my follow-up email. He kept reading, moving through the pages, his eyes scanning faster now, understanding what the progression meant. He got to the email from April 1st, the one where Tiffany had sent a message to Marcus claiming she was handling the onboarding while Rochelle was unexpectedly called away. He looked at that one for a long moment. Then he picked up the document access log, the single page that showed every moment any document in my personnel file had been accessed. His eyes found the entry that mattered. April 4th at 2:47 p.m. Hargrove account. Prospect intake sheet. Accessed by Tiffany Marsh. Employee ID 24891. Action scanned. Gerald Fitch set that page down. He looked at Tiffany. His voice was quiet, but it wasn't warm. It was the voice of someone who had just understood something he didn't want to understand. Is this accurate? Did you scan this document under your employee ID on April 4th? Tiffany's face had gone pale. The colour had drained from her cheeks. She was still holding the certificate, but it looked like it weighed 1,000 pounds now. She said, I was trying to make sure we had everything organised. I was being helpful. The file needed to be complete for the client. I thought... Gerald didn't let her finish. He didn't need to hear the explanation. The documents had already explained everything. He picked up his phone. He said to his assistant, his voice steady and even, Get me Patricia Mena in HR. Now. He didn't hang up. He waited for the connection. Patricia Mena answered within 30 seconds. Gerald said, Patricia, I need you to come to my office immediately. We need to discuss the Hargrove account and the complaint Rochelle Dupree filed on April 22nd. He hung up without waiting for her to respond. The certificate was still in Tiffany's hands. But she was no longer holding it the way you hold something that belongs to you. She was no longer holding it with the grip of someone who had earned it, or even someone who had temporarily possessed it. She was holding it the way you hold something when you've just realized you don't get to keep it. The frame was slightly tilted now. The mat was no longer perfectly aligned. The silver lettering that spelled out her name caught the light at an angle that made it look like it was slipping away. I stood still. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Claudette had been right. The truth had done the moving. Tiffany Marsh was terminated on May 16th. Within 72 hours of me walking into Gerald Fitch's office with the manila envelope, Meridian's legal team had calculated the cost of keeping her and decided it was cheaper to let her go. They offered her a separation agreement, a quiet one, the kind where you sign and you agree not to speak publicly about the circumstances of your departure, and in exchange you get a check that's large enough to cover the second mortgage for a while. Tiffany signed it. I found out later that she took a job at a different agency 3 states away. She never came back to Atlanta. The following Monday, May 19th, Gerald Fitch called me into his office. Not the glass-walled office where the certificate had been tilted in Tiffany's hands. A different one, smaller, more private. He said that Meridian wanted to make things right. He said that I had originated the Hargrove account and that I deserved credit for that work. He said they were offering me the senior account manager position that had been intended for Tiffany. He said the salary would be $74,000. Effective immediately. I didn't say yes. I said I needed to think about it. I said I would give him an answer on Wednesday. That Tuesday, I called Desiree. I said, they're offering me the title and the money. $74,000. Oh. Desiree said, are you going to take it? I said, I don't know. Should I? She said, that's not the question. The question is, what do you want? Do you want the title? Do you want the account? Do you want to stay at that company? I thought about that. I thought about 6 years at Meridian. I thought about the cold call on March 3rd and the red folder and the BCC archive. I thought about Claudette's lesson about receipts. I thought about the fact that I had had to engineer my own justice instead of the system doing it for me. I said, I want the account. I want the title. But I don't want them to make the math work the way they want it to work. Desiree said, then negotiate. Tell them you want the $12,000 difference applied as a signing bonus, not a salary increase. I asked her why that mattered. She said, because a signing bonus is one-time money. A salary increase compounds. Every year you stay. They benefit from paying you less than you're worth. You take the one-time money and you leave that door open. On Wednesday, I walked back into Gerald Fitch's office. I said, I'll take the title, I'll take the account, but I want the $12,000 differential applied as a signing bonus, not added to my base salary. Gerald looked surprised. He said, that's unusual. Most people want the higher salary number. I said, I'm not most people. He made a phone call. He spoke to someone in accounting. Then he said, okay, We can do that. Patricia Mena issued a revised determination letter on May 22nd. It was 3 pages long, much longer than her original dismissal. It detailed the timeline of the complaint. It acknowledged that her initial determination had been made in error. It formally credited me with the origination of the Hargrove account and with the work that had built it from a cold call to a $40,000 contract. It stated that I had provided sufficient documentation of exclusive origination. It stated that I was being promoted to senior account manager, effective May 19th, with back pay applied as a signing bonus in the amount of $12,000. I printed that letter. I took both copies, the original dismissal from May 3rd and the revised determination from May 22nd, and I put them in a folder. A plain manila folder. The kind you can get anywhere. I wrote on the tab in black pen, reference. Then I filed it away. That Saturday evening, I was sitting on my front porch in a wicker chair that Claudette had given me years ago, the kind that creaks when you move, when I called her. The sun was going down over Atlanta. The air was warm. I could hear the sound of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. Children being called inside. Someone grilling something. A dog barking 3 houses down. Claudette answered on the second ring. I said, "Hi, Claudette." She said, "Baby, how are you?" I said, "I'm okay. I got the job. I got the account. I got the money." Claudette said, "I know you did. I know you did, baby." I said, "I learned something." She said, "What's that?" I said, "You were right about the receipts, about collecting them before you need them." Claudette laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from the belly, the kind that means she understood exactly what I meant. She said, 28 years I've been waiting for you to understand that. 28 years. I said, "How did you wait that long?" She said, "The same way you waited, the same way we all wait, one day at a time, one receipt at a time, one moment of knowing you're right even when nobody else believes you yet." We talked for a while longer, about nothing in particular, about the weather and a church bake sale and whether she was coming to visit Atlanta soon. When we hung up, I sat there in the creaking wicker chair, and I watched the sun finish going down. The sky turned from blue to orange to purple to dark. The stars started to appear. I thought about what I'd done. I thought about the manila envelope and the 23 pages and the document access log. I thought about standing in Gerald Fitch's office, calm and composed, saying exactly what I needed to say. They tried to write my ending for me. 6 years of early mornings and late phone calls, a folder full of work with my name on every page, an account I built from nothing. And they thought all of that would just sit down and be quiet. They thought I would accept the story they were telling about collaborative development and shared credit. They thought I would let Patricia Mena close the case and move on with my life like nothing had happened. They were wrong about who I was. This is my account. This is my record. This is my story, and it's just getting started.